What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we are working on our 2021 Volkswagen Atlas project. Today on the Atlas, we are going to be covering how to replace or refresh your front end. Part of that is going to be this control arm kit, which we are going to be installing today, which is available on fcpeuro.com. This includes the control arms, some sway bar end links, ball joints, and all the hardware needed to do that job. We have also added a few more bits, which you can also see in the video description link below. We have some hardware for one of the engine mounts we're going to be removing, possibly a flex disc in the driveline, and we're going to be upgrading our headlight level sensor with our B2B bracket. That is going to be a very small part of some of the B2B goodies which are going to be going on this Atlas, so be sure to subscribe over to the FCP Euro Media channel if you want to see some of that action over there. But before we get into this, let's talk about some of the reasons why you may want to swap out your control arms. Like any other suspension component on the car, over time they are going to age. You have rubber components that can either go brittle, they can tear, they can fail, and things can start getting noisy up front. Typically, control arms, sway bar end links, and tie rods are going to be your culprits, followed by suspension like shock struts and their mounts. So if you're trying to find a noise, get under there with a pry bar, jack up the car, and take a look. Inspect the bushings for any cracks or tears. If you can't find anything there, move your way to your ball joints, end links, and all that good stuff. This is also part of prep for a B2B lift kit that we are going to be installing, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But before we get into it, let's take a look at some of the tools you're going to need for this DIY. For this DIY, you're going to need a pry bar. We have a 1/2 inch and 3/8 drive torque wrench, as well as a 1/2 inch drive ratchet. We have a 21 and an 18 mil wrench. As far as sockets go, we have a T45, a T25, a 10 mil, a 13 mil, a 16 mil, an 18 mil, a 17 mil for the wheels, and a 21 mil as well. Some of them we have both for the 1/2 inch drive and 3/8 drive. Couple extensions. If you are going to be doing the end links and playing along with us today, a 1/4 inch ratchet with an M6 triple square is going to come in handy. And optional but not super necessary is a pass-through socket set like this 15 piece from CTA. This is CTA 7466. You can find that on fcpeuro.com. A pickle fork for our ball joint replacement, a nice large hammer. Some electric tools make the install and removal of the hardware a little bit quicker. And not pictured here but needed is going to be either a free floor jack or screw jack with a little piece of wood for the ball joint side of things. Now that we know what we're working with, let's go ahead and get started. To get started, we're going to start by removing the shield underneath the Atlas. We have 3 T45s and about 10 to 11 T25s, depending on the condition of your car. So let's zap those out of the way. That's going to give us access to the inner hardware on the control arms. We'll get some wheel offs. Now we're going to switch to the T25s. We have 3, 3, 4 in the back. I'll leave the ones in the back last so I can pull down the shield and not drop it. Oftentimes there may be one up front as well, depending on how well your car was loved. So just keep that in mind. If the front's not coming out, you might have one more up there. All right. With the shield to the side, now we're going to get off some wheels and go from there. With the splash shield off, now we're going to get our wheels off. We're going to be focusing on the passenger side of the Atlas. However, the steps are going to be the same for both. 17 mil socket to get the 5 lug bolts off. If you're doing this at home without an impact, 1, I highly suggest it if you're going to continue to DIY on your car at home. But 2, you're going to want to break these free with the car on the ground first, then raise it up. Now, while we have the wheel off, we have a little bit more room to work with. We're going to start with the sway bar end links up top. We can swap those out now. One thing of note, when we install our lift kit, they have their own sway bar end links that they recommend for that. So you're going to see me reuse a little bit of old hardware. Don't get mad because it's going to come right back off again. So let's get a little bit more eye level and we'll zap that baby out. This is a bit unnecessary, but I always like to try to hit these with an electric ratchet or an impact gun to see if they'll break free instead of having to counter hold. So I'm going to use my 18 mil socket to try to zap it out. And we made a little bit of ground, but really wasn't expecting it to come out. So for that, you can move to your wrench and triple square bit and use it as a pass-through socket, or you can use, like we have today, the CTA pass-through socket set. Get our triple square in there and kind of hold that way. So you're gonna need your M6. I'm gonna use this one for the top here. This is the 18. But first, we need to make sure that the M6 is gonna sit itself all the way in. You don't want these to strip. All right, that baby is nice and situated. Spraying these with some PB Blaster beforehand, or your Croil or whatever you have, is gonna go a long way. That's gonna be good to go there. Get that to counter hold. And it's not even that tight, especially if you let them soak for a little bit and hit them with the impacts like we did, just to kind of break them free. A little bit of rust holding us in. Again, I'm gonna reuse this not only for this video, because we are upgrading these end links with the B2B units. These are one-time use. They have a torque to yield torque spec. So again, just for the video, we'll show you what that is. But this hardware itself is just gonna be hanging out for another day or so before it comes off again. But not before we tackle another T25 in the wheel well, as we're gonna have to remove some of this fender liner in the rear to help with the control arm replacement. So let's zap that one out first, and then we'll get underneath. Same thing, we're gonna get our M6 triple square bit situated nicely. You don't want these to be loose, or they're gonna strip, and then they'll make taking this off so much harder. Gonna give it a couple taps to make sure it seats in all the way. And just to show you the alternative to not having the pass-through socket set, you can use a ratcheting wrench. There we go. And I'll just let my 1/4 inch ratchet rest up against the control arm as my counter hold. And I'm gonna hang on to this nut. And while I have you here, let's grab our new end link and swap that baby in. We'll take our 18 mil nut. Sometimes with these fresh ones, and a little bit of a worn nut helps here in this case, but you can get that pretty snug up. And then we're just going to give it a couple snugs by hand before we go with the counter hold method, just to see if we can get it to start squeezing before the ball joint starts spinning, which I think will be okay. Now we'll grab our torque wrench and our 18 mil socket. This bottom one gets torqued down to 40 Newton meters, plus an additional 90 degrees. So pretty much there. We're gonna do our 1/4 turn and 45, and that's good. With that, let's get back in the wheel well. We'll button up the top one, and then we are completely done with the end link portion. We're gonna feed the top end of our end link into our strut, push that baby through, get our locking nut on. Same thing, I'm gonna give this a little baby zap, see if it'll squeeze. If not, the counter hold method is gonna be literally the reverse of how you took these off with your M6 and your 18 mil wrench and or pass-through socket set. For the top bolt, the torque spec is still 40 Newton meters plus only 45 degrees. So a little bit different. There's our 40, and there's our 45. With the end link all situated, now we can focus strictly on the control arm. So once again, let's get underneath and continue on. We have 2 more T25s under here to just give us some play in the wheel liner. We've had this one off before, so we've had a chance to clean up all the stuff that's living back there. We're gonna switch over to our 10 mil socket and just undo 2 10 mil plastic nuts. That will help alleviate this bottom shield a little bit as well. These are gonna stay with the plastic, they're captured, but they're 2 10 mil nuts that we're gonna be undoing. While we continue prepping, 2 13 millimeter bolts just to loosen up the exhaust bracket. With that free, we're gonna work on the 3 16 millimeter nuts, ball joint nuts. Nice and loose, that's good. We have 3 18 millimeter bolts that we're gonna zap out. These 2 bolts are gonna be exactly the same. They're just a hex head with a integrated washer, if you will, or versus the one on the outside has its own washer. It's a little bit thicker too, so you don't have to worry about mixing them up when you get your new ones in there. Let's move on to the annoying bolt up front. To be able to get both of these forward control arm bolts out, you need to undo the lower engine mount. These 2 bolts is enough, and again, these are one-time use. These are also linked in the video description. We need to get these 2 out, and that will allow us to pry the engine forward about 85, 86 millimeters to clear the oil pan. On this side, you have a bit more room than you do on the transmission pan, but do them both at the same time, and you only have to do it once. So we're gonna grab our socket. It's gonna be an 18. We're just gonna zap these 2 out. The shorter one's gonna go up front. The medium length one will go towards the back. So again, hard to mistake which one goes where. We're just gonna zap these out. These are torque to yield. You definitely don't want to reuse them, but you can see the size difference. One longer, one shorter. Shorter up front, longer in the back. All right, that's gonna give us some room to pry this forward. Now let's break free this 21 millimeter bolt. 21 mil wrench just to break this big baby free. Let's give ourselves some room to get that bolt out. The best spot, in my opinion, to pry is gonna be on the transmission side of things. If you get your pry bar, you can just go behind the casing and the subframe. You can get a nice bite from it. Second set of hands doesn't hurt in this step. And just gently pry forward, just enough until you get access to get the bolt out. You don't want to go too crazy. You still have the drive shaft attached to the bevel box. You don't want to tear anything there or hurt the drive shaft. So we're just going to give it a little bit of a pry. This side's going to be tighter, but you can see it's already new. It's already done. It's doable. That's exactly how we did it. Again, second set of hands, especially for this side, it's going to be handy. Now our control arm is free, so let's work on getting it out. Now, one thing to point out, I thought this car had the headlight level sensor rod. It does not. It's only going to be on one side of the control arms. So if you do, just undo the hardware. It's usually bolted through one of these 2 bolt holes here on the control arm, separate it from there and or the subframe side of things before you do this step. I'm just going to use my pry bar to help kind of break this arm free from the subframe. There we go. And there is our old and original control arm. Before we get the new one in, let's work on getting that old ball joint out. As you can see, everything is nice and glossy as we've been shooting this with some Croil to help loosen up the nut. We're gonna use our 18 millimeter wrench and try to break this free. If the ball joint starts spinning on you, if you're doing this on the ground, grab your free floor jack. If you're doing this on the lift like we are, grab your screw jack. For this old one, you don't really need to worry about it, so no wood or anything to protect it, but you want to put pressure on the ball joint end so that the tapered end can lock itself back into the wheel knuckle if this starts spinning. That way you don't have to work on getting the axle out and putting a counter hold in there. So it's just going to make your life a whole lot easier to do that. So we're going to see how far we can get with the 18 millimeter wrench, see if it's going to break free or not. Oh yeah. These aren't supposed to be very tight. They have a low torque spec, and soaking them goes a long way. So as you can see, we broke it free. We're gonna go as far as we can. If you have enough room to get the nut out, then go ahead and remove it. In our case, I don't think we're gonna have that room. These nuts are too tall, and they're gonna hit the axle before we get them off. So we're gonna go up as high as we can, and then back it down just a little bit so that we can get our ball joint remover tool in place. We're gonna undo our 18 mil nut as far as it will go. And then we're gonna grab our ball joint separator tool, our pickle fork, so that we can get this baby free. Unfortunately, there's not enough room between the stud of the ball joint and the axle to get the traditional ball joint popper tool that we've seen us use on some of the videos. We used it on the Mark 7 Golf R as well. Even though this is the same setup, believe it or not, there's less room to work in some of these areas on this Atlas, even though it's twice the size. So we're gonna go as far as we can. We'll probably on the bottom of the axle. All right, a little bit of pressure from the nut on the ball joint's not gonna hurt. Now, one thing with the pickle fork, you need to be mindful if you're doing this with the ball joint separate from the control arm. As you're hammering out, you don't wanna put so much strain on this where you're gonna pop the axle out of the transmission or the bevel box. So if you can, have a second set of hands, push you from the other side, give you some support, or maybe work at it at an angle that won't disrupt things too much. So we'll start off gentle, and if we get super aggressive, we'll have someone hold on the other side. Now that we have the ball joint removed, we're going to wipe down the work area with some shop towels and some brake cleaner, and then we will get our new ball joint in place and our screw jack to help support everything. We're going to feed our new ball joint in, get that nut started up top, again, new locking nut, and now we'll use our screw jack again, and or free floor jack, whichever way you are working, and we're going to put some pressure on the tapered side of things so that it does not spin inside of the spindle. All right, you don't need to go too crazy. I want to push everything out of the way. Now we're going to grab our 18 and just work this baby down. Torque spec for this is going to be 60 Newton meters. You could probably get to it with a crow's foot. It's not a whole lot of power, so we're just going to use our wrists and our fingers and our hands and snug it down nicely. And we'll hit it with the insurance plan. All right, now that we have the ball joint situated, let's get our new control arm in. All right, let's get this baby in here. And really, all we're really fighting is this fender liner. Once we get this sandwiching our subframe, we'll be in a better spot. You can manipulate the end of this bushing a little bit so that it'll be snugged on in your favor here. So I'll hold this back side up. Let's get our 3 ball joint nuts just in place loosely. Let's work on this annoying bolt up front. If you're confused on your hardware, you can take a look at the ones we have here on our cart. These are the 2 that go into the subframe. This is the one that goes, we'll call it on the fender liner side of things, for this back portion of the control arm. So 2 into the subframe, 1 into the body of the car. And the largest, beefiest one is going to be your forward bolt. So let's do that one now. Let's get the 3 in the back started and situated. These get torqued to 70 Newton meters plus an additional 180 degrees. So we're going to snug this up to 130 Newton meters first. For the passenger side, we can just squeeze in the ratchet. You will need to pry the engine forward for the driver's side. And now we'll do an additional 180 degrees. We'll do 190 and another 90. There we go. All right. With that, we can now secure our engine mount hardware once more, our exhaust bracket, and we'll get these 10s and T25 situated. So all we have left to do is the ball joint, the wheel, and go from there. We have 2 13 mil bolts that are gonna go in. All right, let's do the 2 engine mount bolts. These get torqued down to 50 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. We're going to torque these to 40 Newton meters using our 16 mil socket, and then we're going to give them an additional 45 degrees. We're going to snug up the 2 10 mil nuts. This one's a little bit deep in there. Now let's do the 2 T25s that are down here. And don't forget the one in the wheel well as well, behind the brake line. All right, last but not least, we have a splash shield to take care of. 10 T25s, 3 T45s. We'll get the wheel on, torque it up, and wrap this baby up. All right, my good people, at this point, the install of this is going to be the same as the reverse. Ours has been in bad shape for a while, and it just finished breaking. So we're going to get a new one and not bother putting this crusty back on. Again, if you got the control arms done, you can handle a splash shield. Let's get our wheel on, torque it up, and wrap this thing up. All right, let's get this wheel on. Let's get these bolt holes lined up. Gentle snug up in a crisscross pattern. Now let's drop it down and give them the final torque. All right, we're going to torque these down in a crisscross pattern to 140 Newton meters. And with that, my good people, that is going to conclude this DIY for today. Overall, a pretty straightforward job on the Atlas, pretty similar to any other Volkswagen product as of late. So if you've seen the Mark 7 Golf R control arm DIY, you'll see that it's pretty much identical. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Any questions or comments, leave those in the comments section below. And if you like this DIY and you'd like to see more like them, consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.